Hi. Hello. Wonderful. Hi, Facebook. Hi, YouTube. I'm doing this thing where I stack you one on top of the other, as I have done before. And so far, I often do other kind of meetings and gatherings before this on Saturday, and so far it's been pretty light attendance, so I'm assuming there may not be many of you. But if you're in town and you're watching, say hello, please give me a comment, let me know where you're tuning in from. I, of course, started this live without a stack of books, even though I'm going to be talking about books. So I'm sorry, everybody. I can't leave the live stream to go gather books. So you're going to have to imagine I'm holding them up. Hello, London, and hello, Houston. Well, that's exciting. And I see we have one eyeball on Facebook. But so far, YouTube is beating Facebook out. So go YouTube. Very nice to have you all. And Virginia. Hi, Virginia. You know I'm going to be there. I will be in Virginia, I think, next weekend. Very exciting. And Kansas. Yay. Well, this is thrilling. Oh my God. And another UK. Hello, Manchester. I've been there. Hi, everybody. Today I actually planned just to talk about an actual topic. Yeah, we're going to talk about how the Parasolverse and the Parasol Protectorate and all the different series in it came into existence. Of course, I'll also leave some time for, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Questions and answers. We'll leave some time for that at the end. And as of ever, oh, hey, Dick. So Facebook is got some action. So great. The Facebook moderator in on the Facebook. Excellent. So yes, as per usual, I start a little slowly to give people a chance to join, and we start talking about some things like tea, very important subject. In fact, well, I'll pour myself a cup because I just finished one while I was figuring out my tech. Before I do that, I'll show off the teacup. So this is today's teacup. This is my everyday teacup. I own a number of this set. It's the only teacup set I own. Otherwise, I own individual teacups. I find individual teacups are better for larger soirees and parties because then each person has their own teacup and they know exactly what it looks like and they can keep track of it. But I have these for little small gatherings where everybody is sitting down and we are sipping and we know where our teacup is because we don't go anywhere with that teacup. And these are Wedgwood. This is Wedgwood's Amherst pattern. It's my favorite Wedgwood pattern because it has this sort of deco feel and this kind of neutral, cool tone, silvery gray with a little blue in it. I think it is a stunning pattern. It's my favorite. It was originally a gift, this particular teacup, and I liked it so much that I went on Etsy and I bought more of the same one. So that's my teacup for today. I have feelings. Well, when do I not have feelings? I have feelings on everything and opinions on everything. It was Austin who said she is almost entirely made up of ready opinions. That would be me. So I have feelings on the British potteries, the greats, as it were. I like Wedgwood, but I am not a collector of Wedgwood. I'm a Denby collector, and this is one of my favorites from them. I like their ceramic a little bit better. I like a refractory or really high industrialized ceramic. I know, weird for an archaeologist to say. So these are bone china, and these are what I would call refractory. I don't know what sales people call it, but they're oven and microwave and dishwasher safe and everything. And I just like Denby's shapes quite a bit in terms of just their ceramics and pottery. So there it is. I've admitted to it. I'm a Denby girly, not a Wedgwood girly. Oh, the shock of it all. The allegiances to potteries is not dissimilar to allegiances to tea manufacturers, I sometimes feel like. So yes, there it is. Right, ceramics. One of my favorite topics. And now the tea itself. I am a milk first. That's how my mother taught me. And I'm just having my normal Twining 1706 strong this afternoon. I'm feeling the drag of an early start this morning. So I need to keep myself awake for you with a higher caffeine than normal for me in the afternoon. everybody's saying where they're tuning in from. Peaches are in season. Yes, the pit fruits in my part of the world have been absolutely stellar right now, I have to say. Ugh, the apricots in particular, apricot, very slept on pit fruit or stone fruit, as the British would have it. Yeah, we here in North America are not big apricot people. Wildly popular in Northern Europe, however. And I love an apricot. I love an apricot jam. Love an apricot dessert. So delighted to have a short. It feels like it's already ending, but delicious apricot season this year. So I've been eating a lot of apricots and peaches. I like a white nectarine and a white peach. I like that kind of perfumey tropicalness that the white fleshed stone fruits get. So I've been eating them all. My mother made the most spectacular crumble with nectarines and strawberries. And my goodness, what a stellar combination. It was so good that one of my friends has requested it special for her wedding coming up. I see we have quite a few eyeballs now. So this is excellent. I think I am going to go ahead and New Mexico. Hi, New Mexico. I'm going to go ahead and just get started on the topic for today, which is the Parasolverse. Now, I'm going to take a grave risk and dash away from the computer for just a second so that I can get the books so that you can have some visuals as to what. So entertain yourselves, chat about your favorite pit fruits and or your favorite potteries, and I'll be right back. Okay, all the books. So many books. Right. I always say when somebody comes up with a bunch of books for me to sign that if I didn't want to sign them all, why would I have written them all? So if I didn't want to talk about them, then why would I have written them? Same holds true. Before I forget, since there's always one or two of you who ask about lipstick, the lipstick I am wearing is MAC. This is the greatest color lipstick in the world. Not wild about the formula. It's a good formula. Smells nice. I like it. But you know me, I'm a color stay girly. But yeah, MAC's Ruby Woo is the best vintage color. I've never been able to find anything like it. But if you are somebody who really can't bear how expensive it is, and I totally get it, this Maybelline, I think it's called, what's it called? Ultimatte. Aren't they cute? So this Maybelline matte lipstick in $1.99. Yeah, $1.99 is a pretty darn good dupe for that Ruby Woo. It's a touch cooler. I mean, not cooler. It's a touch warmer. So I always think of Ruby Woo as like a true neutral, but it actually is slightly cool leaning. So it's a touch, teeny weeny bit pink. And this is like a true neutral, but it's the closest I've ever found. So if you want to try a similar, very similar color at like a third the price point, then this Maybelline Ultimate is a good option. But this is my diehard. Like I don't know when this came out, like 20 years ago, and I'm still using it. Wild. Anyway, yeah, that was the lipstick covered, the teacup covered. Now we can get on to the serious business of how the books came into existence. So, a long time ago now, my goodness, nearly 20 years, maybe it's not quite that, but a long time ago, I was working on my PhD. No, I was working on my first master's degree, and I was in Nottingham, which is where I have one of my degrees from, one of the many. And so I was at Nottingham, and the book, I decided to write this. So I decided what I really wanted to write while I was not busy on theses and scientific examinations of pottery fragments from the Islamic Empire, 8th to 12th century, was a silly paranormal. At the time, you see, the paranormal bubble was happening, or it had just started to pop, which was, from the late 90s. And I really loved what then was all called urban fantasy, but it was sort of missing elements for me. I really wanted an urban fantasy that was historical. I wanted an urban fantasy that was funny. I wanted an urban fantasy with a female main character. I wanted an urban fantasy that had some rep in it. And so I was sort of hungry for this thing. And as they say, if you want something and then and nobody's writing it, then I guess you have to write it for yourself. So that's what I did. So I gave myself a challenge. I was like, I will write this book and I will write it in 6 months. And then I am not allowed to fuss with it because I have a history of just fussing with things forever. I can only fuss with it and clean it up for 2 months, and then I immediately have to just submit it. Because if I manage to finish it, I should at least try to get it published. And so that's what I did. And I wrote it funny specifically because I'd sold a couple of short stories, and the only shorts that anybody ever wanted to buy from me were funny things. So I thought, there doesn't seem to be a lot of funny stuff written by women in the science fiction and fantasy universe. And of course, it's me, so I had to have a big dose of romance in it as well. So this was like an everything but the kitchen sink because it was everything that I was looking for to read at the time. And that's how the book came to be written. And I did pretty good. I think I managed it in 8 months or so. And then I basically cold submitted it. This is something you can't really do anymore, which means I sent the manuscript out, printed out in hard form, like in a big fat manila envelope. It was the dinosaur age. And I think 2 or 3 publishers were taking slush submissions, which meant you could just submit the entire manuscript to them. Can't imagine what it must have been like, just like stacks of manuscripts showing up at your door. Anyway, that's what I did. And then to the rest, I also submitted like queries and stuff like that. But it was one of those slush submissions that got me a telephone call. So I was back in the US at this point in time. I'd finished my first master's degree, and I was working on my second master's degree, teaching as well, and pursuant to a PhD at the time here in California. And I was at a cafe. I can't remember if I was grading papers or if I was working on or if I was writing or doing something else. But anyway, I was at a cafe during a time off, and I got a telephone call from a 212 area code. And anybody who knows that knows that 212 means New York. And I got very, very excited. And I took the call, and it was an editor from a somewhat major publishing house who really wanted to buy this book. And I sputtered the foam of my latte. Yes, I drink lattes in cafes. I don't drink tea. I don't think you should order tea outside in the United States. I don't think it's safe. So I sputtered my latte foam everywhere, and then I ran out the back of that cafe to the parking lot to better take this call. And that was pretty much the beginning of everything. So at that juncture, I was like, well, I probably need an agent to negotiate with a publisher. So I started querying agents with an offer already from a publisher, which made me be taken seriously a lot sooner and quicker than most, which turned out to be a good thing because this was during the Christmas holidays that all of this started to occur. So I queried 2 agents, one of whom had rejected me before, and the other of whom the publisher said they liked working with, which, not sure I would recommend that. But at the time, I was a newbie, and both of them got back to me, but one of those agents passed me on to his assistant, and the other one got back to me personally within 48 hours. And offered to read the book and see. I mean, the agent, even with an offer on the table, the agent will want to know if they like your style of writing and if they want to represent you in the long run. And they should, right? The agent is interested in a relationship with you, you hope, that is career long. And fortunately for me, that agent was, and that agent is still my agent now, I guess 17 or 18 years later. That's Kristen Nelson, and she came on, and she's now my longest relationship of any kind, aside from family and friends. So, yeah, pretty exciting. So Kristen came on. She loved this book, and she started negotiating with that publishing house that had made me the initial offer. And that negotiation went on for a year. almost a year. And there was a sticking point in that negotiation. And the sticking point was the fact that I was a full-time academic and I planned to continue to be so in my field. I was working on my PhD and I had already published a white paper and I was probably going to publish more in the nonfiction realm. And the option clause for this book was completely open. So the publisher had given me a boilerplate contract, and in that contract, it said that that publisher had the right to option any book of any kind, of any length, any work that I wrote. And I basically said, I can't sign that because some of the things I write are going to be nonfiction, and I can't wait on a publisher to tell me no. And the publisher was like, well, we obviously don't want your nonfiction. And I was like, then put it in the contract. It's like, I'm not going to sign a contract that open-ended because I will obey the letter of the law. And so that it precipitated many a screaming match, it turned out, and back and forthing over that for a very, very, very long time. And eventually, we got pretty frustrated and we started looking at maybe possibly some other publishers. And by that point, of course, I had an agent on board. And that is when Orbit, the publisher of this series, came into the picture. And they basically made us an offer that we couldn't refuse. And they have been my publisher for my adult series ever since. So that's how this book came into existence. So when I signed the contract for this book, there was an option clause for a second book in the same series, which was the point at which I realized I was writing a series. But because negotiations had gone on for so long and it looked like whoever I signed with would be interested in another book in this same series, I was like, okay. And I had already started writing that second book. So when I originally wrote Soulless, I thought it was going to be a prequel standalone and that it would be a prequel standalone to this series. So I always had Prudence's series in my brain, but it was, they wanted more in this series. So that's when I wrote Changeless. And so by the time we finally got around to signing the contract, and by the time this book came out, Changeless was actually already written and turned in. And so, yeah, so that is why I had a rapid release at the beginning of my career, because nobody was waiting on me to write the second book. The second book had already been written because I had an option clause to fulfill, and I'm very diligent and law-abiding. So, yeah. And then after that, other things began to happen, not the least of which was the fact that Changeless has a cliffhanger ending. And there are reasons I did that. And one of the reasons is I was out of contract at that juncture. So I always say, many of you have complained about Changeless and its cliffhanger, but you only have the rest of the series because of that cliffhanger. So you should be grateful to Changeless. Changeless was also the first of my books to hit the New York Times. Soulless came around and re-hit the New York Times in ebook, but Changeless was actually the first one that did it. And so a lot of stuff changed at that juncture, including them wanting more books. So we got another contract for Blameless. And then finally, the final contract was for the last 2 books in that series. So, because Orbit tends to do 2-book contracts. So that's how you have 5 books in the Parasol Protectorate series, all because of Changeless. So be grateful to that cliffhanger ending. Hilariously, I wrote the cliffhanger ending, submitted it to my editor, and then my editor finished the book and called me up in a tizzy and was like, oh my God, I have to know what happens next. And I was like, why are you talking to me? I don't have a contract. You need to talk to my agent. So me. That's me and Davey, who was my first editor. We still, she's no longer my editor. She's long since left this company, but we still have a lovely relationship. I totally adore her. You will often see us drinking at bars at events together because she's adorable. She has very similar taste in shoes to me. So there's long shoe, stiletto conversation. Good times. The olden days. So that's how the Parasol Protectorate series came to be. And now, how did the next series come to be? So we've done with that one. We'll leave her there. So what happened then is Orbit went into negotiation for a spin-off series. But already about halfway through that series, Little Brown had reached out to talk to me about writing young adult. Now, I was a pretty prolific blogger and reviewer back at the beginning, and so those who were interested and had fallen in love with the Soulless series kind of knew that I really love YA. I've always loved YA. It's one of my favorite genres to read. I just adore it as a genre. And so one of the editors at Little Brown reached out to me because she knew that I liked YA and she wanted to know if I would be interested in writing a YA series. And I was like, I absolutely would. Now, Little Brown, or Little Brown Books for Young Readers, LBYR, is also under the same umbrella company as Orbit. So these are two imprints under the same publishing house, Hachette. So it was relatively easy to go on board for a YA series under those circumstances because everybody's motivated to work with each other. So even though these books were sort of still being written and released, it was okay for me to start writing these ones. And what I thought I would be able to do was write one of these and then one of these. And it turns out I can't do that. My brain doesn't work that way. So I started writing this series, and I pitched these books as a 4-book series to Little Brown. I chose 4 books because I'm a big Tamora Pierce fan, and she always wrote her YAs, or she wrote quite a few of her YA series as 4-book series. And I was like, okay, so YA is 4 books. So I pitched 4 books with a story arc and a plan for each book. So this is the first series that I've ever written where I knew exactly kind of what was going to happen in each book, and I had a really good idea on the layout and flow, and all of that was really gelled in my head. I had a big plan and an outline and everything. Also, I pitched these as a prequel, so they would come earlier in time than this series, and that was also intentional. I also used this series to delve into the subject that my PhD thesis was on, which is technological abandonment and innovation, or that's what my thesis was on in the archaeological world. So I also used this to sort of dovetail into epistemological concepts that super interested me. Just, I don't know if you care, but I care. So that was there. So that's how this series was 4 books, starting with Etiquette and Espionage. Etiquette and Espionage was also always the title of the first book. The other titles changed, but this was all pretty much as designed. And by that time I'd had all of the Parasol Protector books on the New York Times listing, and so that just gives an author a certain amount of clout and respect, I guess I would say. And so they talked to me about things like the cover model and the titles, and I got to be a little bit more involved in the book production process than frankly most authors get to be. And it was a lovely experience. However, it was my first experience being orphaned. So halfway through the 3rd book, me writing it, I think, or maybe I'd already turned it in. Anyway, right around there, the original editor who'd gotten these books from me left the publishing industry altogether, sadly. So I got moved to a new editor. So that was my first experience being orphaned. We call it being orphaned. I was orphaned by an editor. That was my first experience with that. It was very sad. I remain sad. I really loved her. We got along super well. That said, my new editor was fabulous. So I also loved my new editor, Deirdre. She is still at Little Brown, and occasionally, very sweetly, she still pings me to see if I want to write something new for them. She's an absolute doll, and I adore her. So that's how these books came to existence. So if you want to know about the cover art specifically for Soulless, I actually have a whole blog post with visual aids and everything, so you can go bop over and do that. I popped the link into the description on Facebook or YouTube, so you can go ahead and follow that if you want to read about cover art in particular. And then the reason I'm mentioning that is there's also a blog post called Why Gail's Brain Went Bang. And that is talking about the start of this book. So that blog post is also linked in the description, so you can go ahead and read that if you're interested. But essentially what happened was I tried to start writing this book while I was already in the middle of writing the finishing school series. And we learn things every time we write a new book, ladies and gentlemen and gentle folks. We learn things. We learn terrible, tragic things about our muses and our creatives. And if we are, like me, mostly a scientist by training, we find this quite frustrating. We don't like it when our muses rebel against us. But that's what happened to me. It turns out I am not one of those writers. I cannot write 2 series at once. I can write one thing and edit something else so long as it is either the previous book in the same series or a book that is completely different. So I could be writing a steampunk and editing a sci-fi, but I cannot go back and forth. And I certainly cannot go back and forth between 2 steampunk books of the same universe in different time periods. It absolutely messed with my mind. I couldn't handle it. Rue's voice became really unclear and incredibly muddled. And it was a very frustrating experience for me. And this book, as a result, came out 2 years later than it was supposed to. So I was under contract to write this for Orbit, and I was in the middle of writing the finishing school books. There they are. And I basically had to turn around to Orbit and say, look, I'm really sorry about this. I can't do it. I cannot make a deadline. And this is where I always say, if you can make your deadlines, you should make them as much as possible so that when the time comes for you to say, you have built up some goodwill. Unfortunately, I had built up some goodwill at this point in time. It's that old Star Trek adage, overpromise and underdeliver. So basically, I had, underpromise and overdeliver. Underpromise and overdeliver. There it is. And then you seem like a miracle worker. So I had always beat my deadlines for the previous 5 Parasol Protectorate books and 2 or 3 finishing school books. And so when the time came for me to turn around and be like, I'm so sorry, I can't write this book in the time. And I basically went to both publishers. I went around to the Little Brown, who was doing the finishing school series, and I said, what I can do for you is write the next 2 books in the series a lot faster. So you're going to get them sooner than promised. I will put all of my attention and focus into finishing out these books in this series. And then I will turn to this one. And in the meantime, Orbit, you're going to have to wait 2 years while I finish out the finishing, ask for the buyback. Instead, they took the delay. So that was why it took so much longer for this one to go to market. And so by the time Prudence came to come out, lots of things had changed. These the finishing school books had come out in hardback, so they decided to release Prudence in hardback, which to this day I'm on record of saying I don't think that was actually a good idea. For one thing, it confused people, and so they put Prudence in the young adult section, whereas it's really not a young adult book. And yeah, and the publishing industry was changing quite a bit. Things were changing. And so with this, so you got Prudence and Imprudence that sort of go together, and then more of a risk taker with those 2 books. So Competence, and then Reticence is a bit of a risk-taking situation because it's my first male main character. And also Reticence is very much a fan service. That book, really, you need to have read most of the other books in the Parasolverse up to that point. There's a lot of look in on characters from other books in a larger way than I would normally do, in a way that I do in my novellas and in my indie published stuff, but which I historically had not done with my traditionally published books. So yeah, so those 2, the final 2 books in the Custard Protocol series, are a little bit something different and aberrant for me. And that's partly because at that point in time, I had built up enough books and enough of a track record in with indie publications that I felt more confident in being able to take a risk with them financially, because this is my livelihood. So that's the Custard Protocol series. So then we got to me experimenting with novellas. So this was my first novella. So this is the first Parasolverse spin-off little series. Now these series are basically standalones that are kind of collected together. So each one can be read on its own. They have a main character and a main couple that are just the mains for that one book. So, but they're sort of linked together by other concepts. So this was the Delightfully Deadly series. So the link together is these are all spin-off characters from the finishing school series, but grown up as adults. So that's how these ones. And I started with this one. And I think this was published in like 2016. It was a while ago. 2016. So this was published in 2016. In between, it would have been probably in between, I want to say, Custard protocols. And I intentionally did a lot of things with this. So I was being crafty with you. I intentionally chose an unpopular character because it was my first time publishing a longer work independently. And so I didn't want to do a favorite character, one of you guys' favorite, like the Biffy and Lyle book or the Madame LeFou book, because and then mess up. So I was like, I better write something that I can really take a risk with, and that maybe that's maybe not going to be as popular out the gate with everybody. So that's why it was Prussia. It was first. And I really wanted to redeem an unlikable character because I already had Channing's in the back of my head. I always knew I was going to write a Channing book for you. So I wanted to try redeeming an unlikable character, but still keeping her unlikable. I thought that would be a really fun challenge. In other words, in knowing her better, her disposition is better understood, again, to quote Austen. So that was a fun challenge for me. A lot of the novellas are sort of little challenge books for me from a craft and writer perspective. I want to do something a little different, something that would never sell to a traditional publisher that that is a bit of a risk. So that was what was going with this. But also it was an intentionally unpopular character. So if you question me as to why I began with a Prussia book, that's why. Then once I had ironed all the kinks, I knew I could do it. I knew I could produce a book because I'd never done a physical book myself before. So I knew all of those things were in place. I had the wheels and the systems in place. That's when I wrote this one. So this was the second publication that I did. And this was, again, even more of a risk. It's a sapphic romance. Sapphic romances just don't sell as well as any other romances. They do sell, they can sell, but they don't sell as well pretty much ever. To this day, actually, this is one of the books that sells, for me, is the lowest seller, but the highest rated. People love this book when they read it, but it's really hard to get people to read it. But this is Madame LeFou's story, and yeah, and it took me a little while to figure out the approach, and then I Imogen sort of sprung into my head, and I was like, oh, she's perfect. So that was how this one came to be. And I chose Madame LeFou because she was such a popular character, and I wanted to sort of give the people what they want with my second one. So that's how this one, and this is in the Supernatural Society sort of line, and that I sort of designed that novella line to really be a fan service. So everybody's favorite and most popular characters kind of fall into that category. So when I did Biffy and Lyle's, it fell into this category, and the Dear Lord Akeldama sort of falls into this category. If I ever write a Lord Akeldama short story or collection, if I ever write an Alessandro, like epistolary work or anything like that, it'll probably all be in the Supernatural Society line. But I haven't written many in this at the moment. And then finally, shortly thereafter, when did this one come out? Let me see. It came out in 2019. Does that seem right? Maybe 2018. This might be the large print edition. Anyway, How to Marry was the next one I did. And that was Channing's book. And again, I was having fun with an unlikable character. Oh, this one here. And this one here. Yeah, I was having fun with an unlikable character, and I love that. I wanted to write an American character for the first time, and by this point in time, I pretty well stretched my muscles in terms of independently or self-publishing my own books, and I felt I had everything down pat. And to this date, this is the most popular of any of the side projects that I've ever done. Everybody seems to really, the numbers game at least, seems to love this book the most. So yeah, and the piece I am currently working on will fall into this category. So that is what will be coming out in the Parasolverse next. But I'm only halfway through, so give me some time. But it will happen, I promise. So there it is. That is pretty much all of our origin stories for the Parasolvers in terms of sort of like the technical origin of how they came to be published out in the world. I can talk a little bit more about like sort of craft and the writer end of conceiving of the universes and coming up with the books and stuff. But I think at this juncture, I'm going to throw it to you and see if anybody has any questions for me. As per usual, please put a question mark at the beginning of your comment, and that way I can sort of scan through and see if anybody's asked. And I'm going to do that since the regular irregulars are probably in residence. So I'm going to scan through and see if anybody's already asked a question and go from there. But I am literally just scanning for a question mark at the beginning of a question. There's some lovely comments going on. I'm on YouTube first, scrolling through. Ooh, people are getting little crowns on YouTube. I didn't know they could do that. It doesn't look like anyone's asked me a question there. So I'm going to move to Facebook. I love it that people love Prussia. She was a real tall. People really hated her. So, oh, somebody says they're inspired by my lives to write their own books, and that's the nicest thing anybody. Oh, S.H. Klein asks about the models on the covers. What a fun question. Actually, I have stuff to impart about the models on the covers. So so the Soulless one, I go into it. The Soulless one, I happen to know the cover model. We are still friends. We became friends on Facebook before Soulless even came out. And we have done a couple of events together down in LA. So there are people out there who have signed copies of the Parasol Protectorate series that are signed by Donna, the cover model, and me. A few sacred books exist out there. Donna is lovely. She is the model on all 5 of the books. I know she looks a little different on some of the books, and that's partly because of me. I encouraged her to curl her hair and stuff for some of the latter books, but that's Donna. So in the case of this book, I found a really cool image and I sent it to them, and then they said nothing, and I thought, oh well, they're not going to listen to me. And then 6 months later, they sent me a thing. Somebody on Facebook contacted me and said, hey, I'm the cover model, and it turned out to be her. So I had unprecedented influence over my cover art. Do not expect this. If you're traditionally published, never expect to have any kind of influence over your own cover art ever at all. Just FYI, unless you are independently publishing. So yes, but I think partly because they knew I was involved in this cover personally, or Hachette knew this, and this cover won awards at the time. It was quite groundbreaking. I know it looks very dated now, but it was quite groundbreaking at the time. When time came around for these covers, I was asked and I was part of the creation process. So one of the things I said was, please make sure that the silhouette is a wide skirted silhouette because of the time period, because it's the 1850s, and it's very important that the silhouette be correct. And I had a hand in choosing the cover model. Now, for these books, the cover model changes, but almost nobody noticed. Everybody thinks the cover model changed on the Parasol Protector books. She didn't. But nobody realizes that the cover model changed on the Finishing School series. So the first 2 books are one model and the second 2 are a different one, or maybe it's just the last one that's a different one. But anyway, they're different models. This one, the one on the cover of the first book, sort of vanished into thin air. We don't know what happened to her. I hope she's okay. And so we had to find a new model. But that was all the publishing company. They did all of that, and I was fine with it. Since it's just a torso-y sort of book anyway, it doesn't quite matter what her head looks like, but interesting. And then these ones, so generally speaking, for traditional publisher, they do the photo shoots and everything. So the Finishing School series, I sent them the fan that appears on one of the book covers. I think it's Waistcoats and Weaponry. It's my actual fan in that cover art. These ones, I think they did shoots for it, and they just picked a model who looked as I described Prudence, or somewhat like I described Prudence. Same thing for the other 2. So it's the same model on the 2 Prudence books, and then obviously it's a different model for Competence and another model and a male model for Reticence. The male model for Reticence is still friends with me on Instagram. We chat occasionally. He's a lovely gay man. Get along well. So I guess I have a history of getting along with my cover models, which is kind of fun. And then so far as the novellas are concerned, I choose these ones. This is a friend of mine named Autumn. She owns and runs Dark Garden, a couture corset company in San Francisco. Love her. Very dear friend, awesome human being, fabulous corsetry, worth every penny. I have several of them. And this is also from a Dark Garden photo shoot. So they posted some of the images to their social media, and I said, who's the photographer and can I buy the rights? And then with some of my other ones, I have a steampunk photographer out of LA who I work with for some of the cover models. And in a couple of cases, this one is actually simply stock art. So, I will even use such stock art on occasion. I tend to prefer, if I have the contacts and there's an image I really love, to try and actually find a photographer of that image or within the steampunk community when possible, to support the photographer, to support the steampunk world, and to, support my local artists and stuff. So in one particular instance, it was the model who owned the rights, so I had to track her down, that kind of thing. And then, like, meet cute, because I'm friendly with Donna, I simply went back to Donna and said, hey, do you have any more photos of you during the time period that you were taking all of the pictures, one of which ended up on the cover of Soulless? And yeah, and she will often basically, I just pay a licensing fee to license them for book covers. And so that is how all of the different models and all of the different cover art comes to be. Okay, I'm going to not go backwards for some reason, you guys Facebook gets to see my apartment. Sorry, everybody. The flip on the Facebook one is in the same place as the scroll for comments, because of course it is. All right, it doesn't look like we have another question after that one. Oh, here's Alex. Alex asks, would you want to have published any indie book as a traditional one or vice versa? Alex, I love this question. Wow. So Alex is essentially asking if there are traditional books that I've published that I wish I had indie published, and vice versa. It's a hard question. It's a really hard question. I would say the first two series is because they came out. So when Soulless released, it was or when I was doing the contracts, it was like 2000. It was 2009, and that, I don't know if we can go in the Wayback Machine that far way back, but it was really the dawn of ebooks, let alone self-publishing. So self-publishing when Soulless came out was still a real dirty word. And also, I am not unaware of the fact that I got all of my platform and a lot of my fan base from the physical copies of Soulless going out into the world. To this day, everybody tells me they found Soulless at Borders, because Borders still existed back then. So I'm pretty sure I have a career as an author because of the legwork that first series did. And that first series also came out in mass market paperback. Those are the first editions for that series. And I actually begged for that. I don't know if they took me into account or not, but I really wanted mass market for a debut release, because Soulless was such a strange creature. It was so different. I didn't know if anybody would like it or want to read it. I thought it would be best if it came out at a really low price point, so people could pick it up for $8 and not feel perturbed about it. Just take a risk, basically. And I think that actually really worked in its favor. The fact that it came out in mass market back. And I think actually the Custard Protocol series was pretty damaged in its release accessibility because it came out in hardcover. I prefer not to release in hardcover. I don't mind if I get a hardcover eventually, but I don't like releasing in hardcover. Sorry. If for those of you who are big hardcover people out there, I'd rather release in paperback now, which is almost exclusively trade. The mass market is just kind of a forgotten format. Nobody really prints mass market anymore. It's really rare these days. But at the time, I was delighted to be coming out in mass market. I think it really worked in that series' favor, which is a very long way of saying that I'm happy my first two series were traditionally published. After that, I don't know. I don't know. I think there are things that would have been a lot easier about the Custard Protocol books if I had decided to independently publish them, but I don't think I was ready at the time yet. And I think it would have been a lot for me to try to distribute out the gate with the first major spin-off series of the Parasol Protectorate series, which was what Custard Protocol was. So I think traditionally published, at least, I'm pretty happy with the ones that were traditionally published. There were a lot of kinks and issues with Prudence from my side in terms of like having to take the delay and all that sort of stuff, but also on publishing sides in terms of print runs, lost copies of signed editions. There's a lot of problems with those books. And also, I was pretty discontented at the time that they opted to release it in hardcover. So, which I have, obviously, if I had released them, I wouldn't have done that. So, but I don't know. If wishes were horses, you can't go back. You can't change the past. It is what it is. So the ones that came out with trad, there they are. In terms of indie books that I wish had gotten a trad deal, I feel like the Tinkered Star Song is that series. I really wanted that series to get a trad deal. I was not surprised that it couldn't. It did go out on submission. I'm not surprised. It went out on submission in a time which is still in existence that sci-fi, especially YA or new adult sci-fi for a slightly younger readership, which is what those books were written for, it just doesn't perform well. It historically hasn't, and it isn't either. It's a pretty terrible market for. I love those books so much, but I understand why the rejections that we got for those books, and my agent shopped it. She took it out. The rejections were so nice. Everybody was like, "We love these books. We can't sell them." And I was just like, fair, truly fair. Which is why I spent so much money to really give them the best cover art I possibly could. And I really tried to like give them the best of the best in order to give them as much as I could in lieu of trad, I guess, to that trilogy. But that's the series that I wish. And mostly because I think if it had gone to traditional publishing and if it had done well, it by some miracle with a traditional publisher's backing, then it probably could have gotten some deals. And by deals, I mean a film animation deal. And by that, I mean something on the order of, oh, I don't know, K-pop Demon Hunters style, right? Like, those books are written visually. They're written with the idea of what anime can do in mind when I wrote those books. So, and really, you just stand a better chance of getting any kind of film deal if the book has a traditional publisher originally. So that was kind of the long game I was thinking about with those books. And that's pretty much the only indie series that I wish had gone trad, but it didn't, and it kind of didn't stand a chance, quite frankly. In terms of all of the other ones, I'm pretty happy with those. Like the San Andreas Shifters series and all of the tie-in Parasolverse ones. I really enjoyed the fact that I get to do exactly what I want with those books from beginning to end. And I don't think having a traditional publisher would have really assisted them in any way. So I'm really happy with most of them. And I would include The Heroine's Journey and as a nonfiction piece in that as well. And I really did struggle with whether to go traditional or indie with the nonfiction, but that's nonfiction is a whole other baby. And I did have the tragedy of choice with that one. That's a whole other discussion for another time. But Alex, very fun question. This is great. I'm so glad we're getting to have a little bit of a different conversation because I powered through on a topic. People are saying which covers they like the best. Ellen has asked if I would ever want to be a cover model, and I'm very flattered. A couple people thought I was the cover model for the Parasol Protectorate series. If you ever meet me and Donna, we look nothing alike, like not even slightly. And while that's very kind, and I did do modeling in my much younger years. I do not find I photograph well. I don't think I'm a very photogenic person. I like to think that's because I'm quite vivacious and like gesticulate. Like it's really hard to get a good picture of me because I'm like, right? Like, this is how I am on a live. It's also how I am in person. So it's really hard to snap a picture. And like if I try to pose, I look kind of awkward. Modeling really is a specific skill set. And I just don't think I really have it. So no, I don't want to be a cover model. I'm a real believer in finding a professional when and if at all possible. And I take that from cover art all the way to cover design to editing and all that sort of thing. So I would rather find somebody better at it than me, because the end product will be better than if I do it myself. But very, very kind of you to ask, Ellen. But my modeling days are definitely over. Madame Askew and Co. asks, do you mentally pair tea with your characters? Oh my goodness, yes, often. Yes, it's a shock to many that in my universe, Alexia, for example, does not drink the same tea as me. There are many who think she might, but no. Alexia is an Assam drinker, in my brain anyway. So yeah, I do, in fact, mentally. I'm scrolling through Facebook to see if there are any additional questions. We're winding down, everybody. So if you have a question, ask it now, and I will try to get to it before the end. S.H. Klein says, any plans for the next book? Yes, there are plans for the next book. I'm currently writing the next book. So for those of you who don't follow the Chirrup, and you should, because that's where I really talk about all of this stuff, I'm plugging away at the new Claw and Courtship book. So it's in this one. It's in this line. It'll be the next book after this. And time-wise, it's a long stretched book. So it's a little bit like Ambush or Door, where we're going to follow these characters from way back. So it starts right around the Napoleonic Wars and then goes all the way through and meets up with this one, it meets up with Ambush or Door. So it comes and extends the timeline to we're mucking about in 1896 at the moment in general. That's where I left you off in Reticence and Romancing the Werewolf and a bunch of other stuff, and Claw and Courtship and Ambush or Door. So everything is sort of coalesced in 1896. And so this one is going to bop in and add to that. So that's our time frame and everything. The cover art will be something along the similar lines to this one. With this sort of smaller figure in a porthole or a puddle or something. I haven't decided quite yet. I haven't decided on the color. You guys can weigh in if you have thoughts on the color. You know me, I always lean in favor of green, but it might be time to branch out into other colors. We'll see what I feel like. The color is like very important to me. So the color of my covers is often sort of influenced by the feel, like the aura color feel of the characters. So we'll see. And like I said, it's halfway through. I never start like production process on a book until that book is finished. And let me tell you, this one's running a little long. As I said in the last Chirrup, there are some of you who will be pleased and some of you who will be saddened. You will be pleased because you get a longer book, which is very exciting. And you will be saddened because it's going to take longer. It's going to take longer for me to write it. And then all the other steps in the process take longer. Editing, developmental editing, copy editing, and so forth. The longer the book, the longer it takes. But, I'm at a stage in my writing career where when I want to write and I'm excited about a book, which I really am with this book, it's a delight to write. I let the book do what it wants to do. And this one apparently wants to be longer than usual. So that's the way it is. And by longer than usual, I mean, it's like the length of one of the books in one of my series. So 95 to 100,000 words, most likely. Could go a scotch longer. But these characters are, traipsing all over the globe, and they have lots to say and things to do and adventures to have. I mean, there's been wild animal attacks and a major natural disaster already. So things are happening. Plus, they have to fall in love, and then they have to not fall in love and deny their feelings, and it's all delightful. There's much angst. I'm enjoying it immensely. We're just about to finally return after all of our travels to London and the London pack. So all of the familiar faces are about to re-enter the picture. So, which means I have to reread a bunch of my own books which is always a pain in the ass, but there it is. So there's plans for the next book. No plans for any book after that one currently, because I have 3 pans in the fire right now. I have a special project, which I've been teasing for years. I have this one, which is the next in the Claw and Courtship series. That's the fiction book I'm working on. And then I have a nonfiction book I'm working on. So plenty to be going on with, quite frankly. Rightio. Moving along. Dick says that he likes my cat blouse. Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of a cat. They say polka dots are in vogue at the moment, and I was like, well, I kind of have cat polka dots. I'll wear that. Scrolling through to see if there's tea party next week. Details, please. Ellen wants to know about the tea party. I'm doing an event in Virginia. It's a tea party. It's for charity. I don't know anything more about it except that you can get tickets online. I believe food is supplied. I will be there to be entertainment. We will have tea and much chitter chatter. That is all I know. It should be fun though. If you're in, I believe, Hanover, Virginia area, then you should come and hang out. It will be a blast. All of the information is on the events page of my website, and there's a link there to the actual thing itself. I'm afraid that's the sufficient. That is the full scope of the details that I have. Wants to know. Alex wants to know about the destruction of the ether, aka World War I, and whether I will ever write about that period. And the answer is probably not. I've got on record to say that my interest in history ends with the First World War. Or as I put it, it ends with the corset. And that's just because it's such a really dark time period for everybody, including, it turns out, my own characters. So it's unlikely. I never rule anything out, but it's unlikely. If I need to, I will write that. If I don't, I won't. All right, I've gone through all of the Facebook questions. It doesn't look like they're anymore, and we're rounding in on the hour. So I'm going to scan through YouTube and see if you have any questions. Oh, seems like there are a few for me. All right. Jenny asks, how do I track world building? Well. I have, actually, this is hilarious because I was just doing some world building tracking. So I have a couple of ways that I do it. I have a master timeline, which people have asked me to publish, but I haven't because there's lots of spoilers still in it. The master timeline, actually, now that I'm talking about it, I maybe should be updating, but I haven't recently. So I have a master timeline of the universe and people being born and which books are occurring where. But like I said, I haven't really used that in a really long time. Instead, I tend to have a 2-pronged tracking. I have the timetables of history, which I can show you. Gail gets up and leaves the live. This is what timetables of history looks like. And this is what Gail's timetables of history looks like. So those notes are all either historical events that timetables of history considers too minor to include, and I needed to include because they're in my books, and also all of the historical events that are my character's historical events. So the birth of a character, that character being involved in a major battle, So, and then in the margin of timetables, I will write which book is occurring during that year. Essentially, timetables of history is a layout. Here, we'll get somewhere where you can't freeze frame and get cheat codes for my universe. Essentially, it has these different headings about what's going on. So there's political events, scientific advancements, art and literature and stuff like that. And then they fill those in for every year. And I like it a lot. It's very useful. It is very biased. There's really not enough Asian stuff in here or African stuff in here. But, it gives me a sort of starting place, and I kind of use it as a logbook for my own stuff as well. And that way I know, so I can put characters into motion all around the globe and have them encounter major battles, but more it gives me an idea or a trigger of memory of who's fighting with who on a big like what's going on in the Prussian Empire, for example. I don't set books there, but I might need an assassination. And you never know when you might need an assassination in your steampunk book. So it's good to know if there was an actual assassination that happened that you could make use of. But often I create fictional assassinations. But sometimes I tangentially coexist with actual events. So yeah, so I basically use this to sort of as a log of everything that's going on. I was just filling it in today with the new book. And because I was thinking about what I need to happen in the next 5 years of the new book, and I needed to see what was going on in the future of my characters, and that requires timetables of history. So that's sort of the answer of how I keep track. The other way I keep track is there's a Wikia World Bible, and that's where I keep track of like all of my characters and the eye color and what happens in their history and quotes that are associated with them and all of that sort of thing. And that is kept up to date by you all. So there are some wonderful, extremely loyal readers who go over to the Wikia to update it pretty regularly. My assistant also updates it. So every time I write a new book, she goes in and fills in all of the sort of necessary data and creates a page for the book and all of that sort of stuff. But Wikia is essentially the same platform that Wikipedia is built on, but they have fan universes on Wikia. So there's like a Marvel one and stuff like that. And I use that platform. It's an open source chassis platform. And so I use that platform. So my World Bible is actually open source and it's open to the world. And, you know, if you really cared about spoilers, you could kind of track what I'm updating, because occasionally I'll be working on a book and go in and update things. And, you know, if you see that Gail has updated Lyle or something, that means Lyle is probably about to be used in the latest book. Even if it's only going to be a 5-sentence mention, I had to read, you know, 3 other books to figure out where he was in space and time and whether I wanted to pick him up and use him on the, I don't know, ferry crossing the Atlantic or something. So, you know, it's complicated when you write a big universe with lots of characters in it in lots of places and times. So, Jenny, the answer is I track the world building in 3 or 4 different places. Oh, yes. The other place I track world building and timeline for the book I'm currently writing is in Scrivener. So I have a timeline within Scrivener that's actually the timeline of events that I'm covering in that specific book. So if it's something like Romancing the Werewolf, which is only covering a couple of weeks, it'll just have a timeline of those couple of weeks. But if it's something like Ambush or Adore, which is covering a long period of history, including touching in and out of things that have already been written, then it will have a really long timeline. So, and that will be, and then I basically color code that timeline by whether I've written that bit, whether it's past, it's already occurred under context, but it isn't written about in this particular book, and whether I am going to write it. I like a color code, okay? It's complicated. It's really complicated. And finally, to answer the how do I track the world building is I have an excellent team of beta readers, and I am very, very reliant upon them for continuity checks. It's their primary function at this point in time is to make sure I am not messing up the ages of a character, the appearances of a character, the location in time and space. And they have, they read every single one of my books, but well before publication. And every single time they've caught an error, they are wonderful, and I'm very reliant on them. They're very good. So those beta readers are very important to me, and they're the final cog in the machinery. Gretty, we're in the YouTube name sphere. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's a 1914 or not, but anyway, asks, how do I come up with so many fun character names? So I do a lot of research into tombstones from the correct time period. So apparently there's a lot of tombstones listed online. And so I really like to look up actual proper Victorian names. And then I will go for ones that really sound historical to me. Like they sound like the correct time period. And then if I'm writing characters of other cultures or times and places, I go pretty deep into the correct names from the time periods and the location of the history of that character. Unless, of course, the character has changed their names, which some of them very much do. And then I also like to put little secret meanings into the names. So a lot of the werewolf names also mean wolf, and a lot of the vampire names also mean deadly carrion or blood or some iteration thereof. if you go far back enough. So yeah, and then when I'm coming up with alien names for the sci-fi stuff, it's a whole other kettle of fish. I have a really fun time with them. And then I also now will Google the names often to make sure that there isn't somebody currently named that. Like, so the name isn't actually in use. I don't want to offend anybody or being accused of like stealing anybody's identity or anything like that. So I want to make sure that the names I come up with are very unique, at least in combination, first, last, if nothing else. So that's the names. Nerdtastic asks, in what ways have my graduate programs and academic interests informed my writing concepts and processes? And my goodness, that's a long question, and we're supposed to be ending soon. So perhaps I will write that down for our next live. I'm sorry, Nerdtastic. I don't feel like I have a scope to cover it. But I think it would be fun to talk about fiction writing and academia. There's a lot of us in the sci-fi fantasy world who are actually secretly academics, or not so secretly academics, or who were academics. Julia asks, how much had I developed the history of the Parasolverse before I wrote Etiquette Espionage? And the answer is I had a lot, especially the evolution of the technology. So I knew exactly what had happened to all of the technology before I started writing the finishing school book. That bit I was very clear on, how the world had evolved all the way and up to supersaturation. So the answer, Julia, is a lot. I knew a lot before I started writing Etiquette Espionage. I got the question as to whether Prudence and Quinnell's kid or Janelle's kid may ever get a book series. I don't know. It's open-ended. She definitely could. We're getting into time periods that I don't love writing, though. We're getting on towards the turn of the century, and I get very less interested in the history of those times. So maybe, but nothing concretely planned. Yes, and there's some fun other chatter about what the publishing world was like when Soulless first came out, and my goodness, was it a different time and place. Lime green as a suggestion for the cover. That is possible. Well, that's the other thing, is I also like complementary covers, so when the spines are next to each other, they look good. So, have to think about these things. And this is sort of a muted pink, so I'm not sure a lime green would go very well with the muted pink. Somebody asked if there is food in the new book. Good question. There's a little bit of food, but not a lot of food for reasons. We'll put it this way. There's a lot of raw meat, at least in the first half. That was kind of a touch of a spoiler, but not much. Keeping up with the world building, wonderful. I think we've answered most of the questions. I'm sorry, Nerdtastic. I promise I will get to your question later. Academia, the intersection of academia and fiction writing. Fun times. Would love to chat about it. And I'm feeling at 4:10 that it's time for us to say goodbye. But it has been an absolute delight talking with you all. Thank you for some truly spectacular questions. And it's been an interesting trip down memory lane discussing how these books came into existence. Don't spill my secrets. Don't let them know that I've been talking about them with the capital T, them. And yeah, hang on, go sign up for the Chirrup if you want to get the latest on how this new book is going. And I will hopefully see you for a live. I don't know if I have time for one next month. I might be traveling. But if I have, I will, since this seems to be working quite well, having this two-prong attack. And it's so delightful to talk to you all. I hope you all have wonderful summers, if it's summer where you are, and wonderful winters, if it's winter where you are. And yeah. Eat tasty things for me, read delicious books for me, and tell me about them both. And go pets your pets if you have them. And tell your pets I love them. And I will talk to you all later.